Good morning, my dear friends. I would like to request you to this talk on promissory note and bills of exchange to kindly listen this speech. The Indian Negotiable Instrument Act 1881 does not define the negotiable instrument, whereas the section 13 of the Indian Negotiable Instrument Act says that an instrument means a promissory note, a bill of exchange, or a check payable either to order or bearer with the words order or bearer appear over the instrument or not. There are good number of definitions given by eminent personalities. In England, Justice Casey Wallace, he defined a negotiable instrument as one, the property in which is acquired by anyone who takes it bona fide and for value, notwithstanding any defect of the title of the person from whom he took it. Thus, free negotiability is the salient feature of these negotiable instruments. One more definition given by Sir Thomas, where he defined a negotiable instrument as the instrument which is freely transferable either by mere delivery or by endorsement and delivery. That also either by application of law or otherwise by the custom of the trade concerned, and confers the privilege on the person who receives it bona fide and for value to possess the good title thereto. So from these 2 points, we can come to understand that negotiable instruments are freely transferable either by delivery or else with endorsement and also delivery. And the person who is receiving will also get the privilege of good title over the instrument. Again, it is made clear that negotiable instrument means any one of these 3 instruments, namely promissory note or bills of exchange or check. So these are the available source of information in the Indian Negotiable Instruments Act. But we have to note here that in addition to these 3, there are some other instruments which have acquired the feature of negotiability by the usage of custom or trade practice under section 137 of the Transfer of Property Act. It is recognized that this instrument may be negotiable either by law or by custom. In our country, we have seen some other instruments like government promissory notes, short jag hundis, or delivery orders, railway receipts, which are all found to be held negotiable by usage or the custom of trade. Now let us take the promissory note and go through it. According to section 4 of the Indian Negotiable Instrument Act, a promissory note is an instrument in writing containing an unconditional undertaking, say promise, which is signed by the maker with an intention to pay a certain sum of money only, either to or to the order of a certain person or otherwise to the bearer of the instruments. Here, in this promissory notes, usually you will find that there will be two parties, namely promisor and promisee. A promissory note is drawn and signed by a debtor. He is a person who will make promise to pay the creditor the specified sum of money either on demand or after the expiry of a specified period, as the case may be. Now, let us see the features of a promissory note. As stated in the earlier definitions, a promissory note is also a negotiable instrument which must be in writing only, which means it's an instrument in writing. And second one is, a promissory note shall contain an unconditional promise to pay the certain amount as mentioned there on the instrument. The third important feature is it must be signed by the maker. Then only it will be valid. A promissory note without signature is invalid. So here we have to see that the maker must be certain about the promissory note. There should not be any sort of contradiction. So also the payee must be certain. Here the promise should be to pay money and money only. Now the amount should be certain. Now let us see the point each one separately. Generally, a promissory note will contain a promise to pay a certain sum of money, which must be in writing. Now here we have to see that a oral promise will not at all stand. So it will not form to be a promissory note. So it must be in writing, besides containing a conditional wording like promise to pay. Now here we have to note that the instrument may be in written with pencil or in ink. or in printing or engraving or lithographing. It may be in any form, but it comes to a promissory note. If it is satisfying the other features, though the instrument is written with pencil, it is not prohibited by law. But from the security point of view, it is not desirable because there is a possibility of that alterations which can be made easily. The second aspect is about the unconditional promise to pay. It is a mere acknowledgement of debt and not an oral promise where it is insufficient. So to make it adequate, there must be an express undertaking to pay money. This undertaking should also be without any conditions. That is, it must be unconditional. Now the promise should not be made dependent upon the happening of a particular event. But if the time for payment of the amount is to take place after the lapse of certain period, say 3 months, then the promise is not deemed to be conditional. So it is bound to have the limit of time here in this instrument. Say, let us look at the example. If Mr. Ram writes to Rao, and I owe you, which says that rupees 25,000. But if Ram writes to Rao, I promise to pay Rao or order rupees 25,000. That is the form of the promissory note. Before a document which can be considered to be a promissory note, it should be a promissory note by its appearance in the form and also in the intention in its contents. If simply it's not there, it is nothing but indebtedness is acknowledged in a document for a defined sum of amount. Or money payable on demand, then it is enough to make a document or a promissory note, and the document need not necessarily say that the promises to be for the purpose of repayment by the debtor. Merely because a document says that payment to be made when demanded, the undertaking to pay the amount does not become conditional. The absence of the word I promise to pay will make no difference in the tenure or the instrument, provided it fulfills the other conditions of a promissory note. The third requisite is that a promissory note should be signed by the maker. Now, here the person who promises to pay must sign the document even though he writes with his own writing, that is handwriting. It may be even signed by the authorized agent of the maker. But here The authorized agent must state that signing on his behalf, that is, on behalf of the principal. Here, there are no restrictions on the form and place of signature in the instrument. Here also it may be made in pencil or in ink or a thumb mark in case of illiterate persons or simply with initials also. But it is always safe that a pencil is not used with a view to prevent the possible alterations which could be made to the instrument. Next aspect is that the maker must be certain. Now, the identity of the maker must be specific and certain. The usually name of his father and mother or address otherwise are mentioned over the document. But the document must clearly mention the person who binds himself to pay the money. He may be described even by his official designation. In case, in a situation where two or more persons sign over the document, they are making themselves liable to pay the amount jointly or severally. The next aspect is about the payee. Here, the payee must be certain. The person to whom we are going to effect the payment must be very, very clear. The payee is considered as a certain person for the purpose of payment. Even if he is named by mistake, or sometimes otherwise with his official designation by description. The term person includes the individual persons or body corporate or local authorities or the cooperative societies, education societies, or other associations of persons in the society, all will include in this purview. And payment is to be made to the concerned officer or authority of the institution. Here, in the event of any mistake in the name of payee or in his designation, still the promissory note is held valid. So if the payee can be identified by evidence, even if the note is exercised in favor of a person who is dead, without the knowledge of his death, the maker is liable to pay the amounts mentioned to the legal heirs of the deceased person. The next feature is that the promise should be only to pay money and money only, nothing else. The promise should be only for money, as money is the only instrument or tender legal money. But it will not be substituted with something else in the form of any goods or other sort of papers as a substitute in lieu of money. Then other conditions like features of the place, date of execution, the amount of consideration, all are required to be mentioned upon the instrument. Now, the quantum of amount must be certain. The amount payable is specified, is certain. In the third paragraph of the section 5 of the Indian Negotiable Instruments Act, the sum does not become indefinite because of the following reasons. Because there's a promise to pay the money with interest at a fixed rate. Now, the amount is to be paid in the indicated rate of exchange only, not in some other foreign currencies. Next, the amount is payable in installments if there is any such condition. And finally, that the whole balance shall fall due for payment as a default being committed in the payment of any one of the installments. So, with this, we end this session on promissory notes. Now, let us take the bills of exchange and go through its details. Yes, the bills of exchange is a written and signed instrument which contains an order directing a person whose name is mentioned in it to pay a certain sum of money only to or to the order of a certain person or the bearer. The bills of exchange arranges in the business transaction. Normally, it will arise whenever the credit sales are made. Usually, the seller draws a bill on the buyer to pay the amount specified over the instrument after giving some time. The title of the bill can be transferred by endorsement and or delivery, or it can be discounted with a banker in case of any emergency. It can also be later sent on due date for collection to the banker. So in these modes, it can be dealt with. Here in this bills of exchange, normally we find the following three parties. A person who makes the bills is a drawer. Secondly, the person who is directed to pay the money is called the drawee. Next, the person to whom the payment is called as a payee. Sometimes the drawer and payee may be one and the same. If it is retained in his hands till the due date, or otherwise, in the event of giving it by endorsement and it gets transferred, then the holder in due course will become the payee because of his holding the instrument. Now, there are two types of bills of exchange in this regard. First one is a bill which is to be payable on demand, and the second one is a bill which has to be payable after some period with rate of interest rate which is tagged upon thereon. Simply these are called the time bill and demand bill. Now, the time bill is one which is drawn subject to the condition that the bill has to be payable after expiry of some time, which covers a grace period of 3 days, after which it becomes payable along with interest thereon. Whereas in case of a demand bill, it is one which is drawn with a condition that the bill becomes payable on demand. And here, there is no question of allowing any kind of grace period in this regard. Now let us see the features of bills of exchange. Here we see, similar to that of a promissory note, a bill of exchange is also an instrument which must be in writing. Here, the thing is, the bills of exchange will have an express order to pay. This is the instrument which has to be signed by the drawer. Here in this instrument, the order should be unconditional. Likewise, the same rule of sum payable must be specific and certain, and there should not be any difference between the words and figures mentioned over the instrument. Along with this, the instrument should be properly dated and duly stamped. There will be 3 parties, namely drawer, drawee, and payee. Here in this bills of exchange also, the payee must be certain. Let us go through the details now. So, we'll make this study with a comparative approach. So now we'll find the differences between a promissory note and the bills of exchange, and thus we'll make this study. Generally, with regard to the promise and order, a promissory note contains an unconditional promise to pay money by the debtor to the creditor. Now here, the maker makes the promise, and a bill of exchange, on the other hand, contains an order to pay a certain sum of money. Coming to the parties, in case of a promissory note, there are only 2 parties, namely maker and payee. Usually we call them as promisor and promisee. Whereas it comes to a bills of exchange, there may be 3 parties where it is drawer, drawee, and payee. Sometimes payee and drawee will be one, and even in the case of making any more endorsements, and drawee and payee may be different. Finally, it may go to the hands of somebody else. Then he will be the holder in due course. Next aspect is with regard to the acceptance. A bill of exchange requires acceptance by the drawee to become a valid and legal instrument. Whereas in respect of a promissory note, it does not require any sort of acceptance because the maker himself is the promisor who is undertaking to pay. Here, we notice the unconditional acceptance because there is a possibility of a bill of exchange got accepted conditionally. Whereas a promissory note does not contain any such restrictions or conditions because there we find an unconditional undertaking. So acceptance question does not arise here. Then if we take the liability of the maker of a promissory note is primary and absolute. Whereas in case of bills of exchange, the liability of a drawer of the bill is secondary and conditional. So the drawer is primarily liable. Next, coming to the presentment of the instrument for the purpose of payment, both the instruments are need to be present. Sometimes a promissory note may be dishonored by non-payment, whereas a bill of exchange is to be accepted before it is presented for payment, and it may be dishonored by non-acceptance or not making payment on due time. But here, in case of bills of exchange, notice of dishonor must be given to all the parties, and noting charges will also be made thereupon. Now, coming to the position of a maker, in respect of a promissory note, the maker stands in a position which is immediate with pecuniary relationship with the payee. In regard to the bills of exchange, here the drawer stands with immediate relationship with the acceptor and not the payee. Next, coming to the maker of a promissory note, he has no right to attach any sort of conditions. Now, the acceptor of the bills of exchange can only accept the bill conditionally in the event of dishonor. Formalities in case of a dishonor of a bill of exchange, either by non-acceptance or for non-payment. The notice of dishonor must be given by the holder to all the prior parties. Whereas in case of a promissory note, when it is dishonored on its presentment for payment, no such duties is required. So far, in this discussion, we have discussed about the definition and features of bills of exchange and a promissory note, and made the comparative study. Moreover, checks are also considered to be negotiable instruments, but we will discuss the checks in detail in our next lesson. Thank you, one and all.